G'day, I'm Michael Dodd. I am a one-time blowtorch on the belly journalist from Australia, now living in the Northern Hemisphere, and I will be talking to Prosper about how you can give great answers to tough questions at work. And if you do really well when you're standing up to pressure, you will actually develop prosperity verbally and possibly in the bank as well, and you will prosper.
Hello and welcome to yet another exciting episode of the Online Prosperity Show. I'm your host, Prosper Taruvinga, and as you know, this is your number one spot for exclusive gut-level insights on how to truly prosper mind, career, and soul. And today's guest is none other than Michael Dodd from Michael Dodd Communications. Now, Michael, how are you doing today?
G'day, Prosper. Really well, and great to be talking to a person called Prosper, which also seems to be a kind of a motivational address all in one word, which is brilliant.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to jump into all of that, and I like how you addressed me by saying g'day. We're going to talk about your time in rural Sydney and everything else that comes along with it. Now, to our viewers, Michael Dodd is a journalist turned speaker, the author of Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work, and someone who can still ask questions that feel like a blowtorch on your belly, but in the most inspiring way possible. Of course, we've already started talking about motivation and things that come along with it. So Michael actually helps professionals go from all those sweaty palms in interviews and maybe presentations to being confident, clear, and memorable communicators. And whether you're facing tough client or maybe just a hungry interviewer or your own self-doubt, Michael is the guy who helps you shine under pressure. Now, Michael, I could go on and talk about things I'm not even qualified to talk about. Tell us a little bit about your journey. You started off in rural Sydney, for all I know. Oh, was there a whole story behind that story? You let us know.
I'd say suburban Sydney. I used to work on a newspaper called the Manly Daily in Sydney, and from there I went to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and I came in as a trainee, so I was at the bottom end of the broadcasting hierarchy, and they put a great effort into me and my colleagues as trainees at the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Current Affairs Department, which puts out the programs AM, PM, The World Today, and a few others. And they trained us to be really tough but fair interviewers. And around the time, and I did do some early interviews with a guy called Neville Wran, who was the Premier of New South Wales and also went on to be the president of the Australian Labor Party. And he was a sort of a political giant, and he did a lot of good things. He also was frequently accused of corruption. For example, his prisons minister, Rex Jackson, ended up in prison, which if you're the Premier of New South Wales, it's not a good look. And in Australia, there were two packs of reporters. There was one called the Rat Pack in Canberra, which I went on to join as being part of the ABC's bureau in Canberra. But they also had in New South Wales what they called the Mouse Pack, which was a bit less scary than the Rat Pack, but they still asked tough questions. Now, I wasn't a permanent member of the Mouse Pack, but sometimes Neville Wran would be giving a press conference or making himself available, and I would be there with my ABC microphone asking him questions. And he came up with this term. He used to complain about it, that people used to ask him what he called blowtorch on the belly questions, which I think is a brilliant term. It concentrates the mind, and certainly the ABC was training us, even though they didn't use the term at the time. They were effectively teaching us how to ask blowtorch on the belly questions, which for our viewers and listeners is the kind of question, if you're going to be asked questions tomorrow and you wake up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. and you're saying, I hope they don't ask me that, that is typically a blowtorch on the belly question. It's one you don't want to do. And as a professional, since I've moved from being a political correspondent and a foreign correspondent, I've moved to helping, as a recovering journalist, as we call it, how to help audiences and individual clients and companies how to make sure they can give great answers to blowtorch on the belly questions. And so if I had my time over again, I would have actually put blowtorch on the belly questions in the title of the book. If we do a new version of it, I'm going to suggest that we call it that, great answers to blowtorch on the belly questions at work, because if you're ready for those and you know what to say when that question you don't want comes up, then you're probably going to be much better mentally prepared to give great answers to all the easier questions that are likely to come up. And when you're being interviewed on the media, this is a little hot tip for you, Prosper. When you're being interviewed on the media, you do want to be ready for the really tough questions, but sometimes it's really easy questions that people come unstuck on because they haven't properly prepared. They don't have in their mind the kind of things that they should be saying when the right kind of question comes up. And I point out in the book, actually, that there was a series of very famous interviews by a guy called Richard Nixon, who was, I would say, the second worst president that the United States had ever had. At the time, he was the worst president. He had to resign as president. No one else has done that before or since. And he gave a series of interviews to David Frost, a British international interviewer who was pretty good at asking kind of blowtorch on the belly questions. But there was one in particular he asked Richard Nixon, where Richard Nixon gave a terrible answer, and it was a very soft question. I can't remember what the question was. I did look it up once for my research for the book, but it was basically a fairly bland kind of question about the powers that Nixon thought that he had when he was president. And Nixon gave a really infamously bad answer. He said, if the president does it, whatever it is, well, if the president does it, then it's legal. So he thought that doing all the bad things that he and his team did, which included breaking into the Watergate Hotel and stealing stuff from the opposition party, the Democrats in America, or phone tapping people or recording conversations with people that they didn't realize were being recorded, he thought, well, because he was the president, it was legal. It was a terrible answer. It did give a great insight into Richard Nixon's thinking, which ultimately led to why he had to resign. But I point this out to my audiences that it's not just the tough blowtorch on the belly questions that can bring you unstuck. You need to give great answers to easy questions as well as hard ones if you are to shine out in the media and beyond the media in real life conversations, whether it's with your clients, with your prospects, in job interviews, or wherever tough questions or tricky questions or unwelcome questions could pop up. You need to be ready for them. So the sort of message behind my book is plan, prepare, and practice. So you don't have to know exactly what the questions are, but you need to have positive messages and positive examples that you can actually use within your interviews so that you are getting the right things across to your audience, but still making sure you answer the questions. It's not about avoiding the answers. And sleazy, slimy politicians, which seem to bob up in all countries. I know they have been out there in Australia, and they have them in Britain, where I live now, and in dictatorship countries and in democratic countries. There are these people who are known as sleazy, slimy politicians. And one of the ways you can spot a sleazy, slimy politician, as opposed to an enlightened, brilliant one, is that the sleazy, slimy politician will avoid answering questions that they don't like. They'll do anything. They'll try and divert. They will try and attack the media. They will do all kinds of things except give a straight answer to a reasonable question. And great answers involves straight, reasonable answers to every question, so that you are there, giving a great impression and trying to help your audience with whatever an interviewer or someone else is asking on their behalf.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that coverage over there, Michael, because it really opens us up to, what it is that we should be cognizant of. And as you say, you need to plan, prepare, and practice. Now, we live in a world where the mic is always on. The camera is always on. And it doesn't necessarily mean a four-man crew walking around trying to stick something in your face. That could be somebody with their phone, and they could literally just record something that could end up on a TikTok feed. And you never know these days on a news feed that is actually, with a massive audience. Now, my question now is about the planning, preparing, and the practice. Where does one begin when all of these things can just happen at an instant like that?
It's a very good point. And typically when I'm working with chief executives, who I work with quite a lot, one of the points that I make to them is you're always on. People inside your company, your clients, your prospects, they are always looking at you. Like if a chief executive, goes to the staff canteen, which they sometimes do, then people are watching them. When I was in the press gallery in Canberra, Bill Hayden was one of the great mighty leaders. He was the Foreign Affairs Minister for much of his time while I was in Canberra. But he would sometimes turn up in the staff canteen, in the canteen for where journalists could go. And there was another one called Michael Duffy, who was a prominent backbencher and at times minister. And he would turn up at the canteen. And the thing was that when they walked into the canteen, we as journalists, and of course there were probably dozens of journalists there at any time, we would all watch them. And people need to know that. If you're the CEO and you walk into anything where the rest of the staff are, they will be paying more attention to what you do and what you say. So it's very important. The higher you get, the more watched you are. And so in terms of training, typically I'm training people for a specific situation, for an interview or for a particularly potentially tough interaction with a bunch of shareholders or whatever it might be. But the thing is that if you're ready for that and you're used to that and you're used to shining when the spotlight is on you, then you'll get into the habit of just automatically giving great answers to any questions that come, even though you haven't trained specifically for this particular occasion or that particular question. And a lot of the training, and this is one of the essences of the book, it's not just to get you ready for that one blowtorch on the belly question that you're thinking, I hope they don't ask me that, which they probably will ask you, but it's a matter of being ready for whatever comes at you in whatever situation. And if you think of someone who you've seen on TV or radio, who you think they're always cool and calm and enlightening, even when they're under pressure, and there are people like that, some of them have probably been trained by some of my colleagues in the industry, or some of them may be just naturals. But in most cases, the ones who shine out have had some training, And so they are into the idea of preparing, practicing for the big occasion or for any occasion. And the thing is that while there are a few naturals, and you often see someone who's good and they'll say, oh, they're just a natural. But when you actually dig deeper into what this natural performer has done, they've often been in the theatre, or they've had some kind of training or some kind of experience where they've actually learned how to give great answers to tough questions. And one of the points is it is a learnable skill. You can give great answers to tough questions and easier questions. You can learn it, and then it becomes automatic, and you can do that. And so if we're trying to boost your prosperity through a prosperity program, then that is a useful thing to know. You might think, well, I sometimes when I'm in the spotlight, I'm not very good. The thing is, you can learn how to give better answers to the kind of questions you expect and the kind of questions that come as a surprise. You can do better if you actually think about it and you plan, prepare, and practice. It makes a difference.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for that. Now, talking about media training and the training that you're talking about, you went from being a political reporter, and at what point did you think, I'm tired of these blowtorch questions, maybe it's time for me to start teaching others how to survive them instead?
Well, I went from being a political reporter, and I got to the point, this might shock some of your viewers, but I used to live in a place called Canberra. And Canberra gets held up as a kind of a bit of a joke place, sometimes a waste of a good sheep paddock, or a waste of a good sheep field, as they might say in the UK. But I used to be eating, sleeping, breathing politics, and a lot of people in Canberra do, whether they're politicians, whether they're public servants, or whether they're journalists. A lot of people talk and think politics a lot. And I had 4 years of being a person who I went on 2 election campaigns, chasing Bob Hawke and Andrew Peacock and John Howard around Australia on missions. And I got to a point after a number of years where I thought, this is a bit heretical if you're living in Canberra, maybe the world is even bigger than Canberra politics. And so I thought, well, I'll take a year out. And I got permission to leave the ABC for a year. They were very good about it. So I went on a freelancing mission to Europe. And I was particularly focused on Eastern Europe. On Central Europe, because back then there was this thing called the Cold War. In 2025, it sometimes thinks when you look at the Ukraine war that the Cold War is back, and it's sometimes not that cold. It's a kind of hot war sometimes. But we had, it was an amazing time in the late 80s, because suddenly in Moscow, after years of having these dreadful dictators like Brezhnev and Stalin, suddenly this guy called Mikhail Gorbachev popped up, and he was different. Unlike all his predecessors, he actually believed in, perestroika, which I think was something about freedom of economics, and glasnost, which was about openness, and he was different. So I arrived in Europe at that time, and I started sending back reports to the ABC from not from Moscow, because we had a new Moscow office there with a guy called John Lombard, who was doing a great job. But there were lots of other countries which were underreported in Australia. In particular, I went to Poland, and that was under the thumb of Moscow. And there was a guy called General Jaruzelski, who was a bit more. He wasn't really very Gorbachev in his outlook. He was much more Stalin or Brezhnev, and he suppressed the people. But I was in Poland, and I did, which wasn't. They weren't very good at suppressing people in Poland, and the Polish people wanted democracy. And I did an interview with a guy called Lech Wałęsa, who was from the Solidarity Trade Union in Gdansk, and he was organising shipyard strikes and even though he was in the shipping industry, he ultimately ended up organizing strikes in coal mines in Poland. And eventually, Poland suddenly shook off the shackles of both the Soviet Union and dictatorship. And they ended up, I went back to Poland to cover Lech Wałęsa when he became the first democratically elected president in Poland for a very, very long time. And so it was really exciting. They had revolutions in 1989. They had a whole bunch of revolutions, and I got to cover some of them. I got to cover the so-called Velvet Revolution in Prague, in what was called Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic and Slovakia, as two separate countries. And I even got to ask a question of a guy called Václav Havel, who was a playwright and a dissident and the leader of the Velvet Revolution. So he actually gave a fantastic answer to one of my questions, actually, which was, are you going to become the new democratically elected president? I'll come back to that when we get further into great answers along the way. But it was great to be in Europe at a time when these revolutions were happening. And I eventually became the ABC's first, last and only correspondent in Berlin, which was a fantastic experience just after the Berlin Wall came down. And I was able to go and report on what was happening, all the changes in eastern, what was East Germany and became the eastern part of the greater Germany. And I had a fantastic time. Eventually, unfortunately, the ABC ran out of money to keep the Berlin bureau going. So I had a choice of either coming back to chase fire engines up the street in Sydney or to stay in Europe, which was very exciting. And that's when I decided to stay on in Europe and ultimately become an international professional speaker, where I visited 6 continents so far. Haven't been to the Antarctic yet. But I've helped people on 6 continents give great answers to tough questions, sometimes as speeches and sometimes in individual training sessions. And that was a lot of fun and still is. And so I've sort of stopped being a journalist. So I'm now a recovering journalist, and I can help people understand journalists and to give great answers to journalists, and also I can draw on my skills as a blowtorch on the belly questioner in training sessions, or sometimes I get audience members on stage and I ask them blowtorch on the belly questions, and I can show them in front of the audience how you can give great answers to that question that you really don't want and answer it, but still give a magnificent question which keeps your reputation intact but helps your audience. And so I find this very positive. It's probably more positive than journalism, where a bad headline, taxes going up, is always preferred by a tabloid newspaper than taxes coming down. So when you're actually helping people to give great answers, then it's a really positive experience for me and for them. And so I do find I'm on a very positive trajectory. And so it's kind of a nice way to live, to be traveling around to wherever I'm needed to help people give great answers. And it's, while you have to ask them some tough questions in the training session, it's more positive than basically asking the Prime Minister, are you going to resign, Prime Minister, because of this scandal or whatever. So life's good and very positive, helping people in a positive way.
I like that. And thank you so much for that elaborate sort of answer. And obviously, while we're still on that transition where you were left high and dry in Europe, and then you decided, I'm going to go on by myself, were there any sort of fears? Because you're coming from the comfort zone of you on the other side, asking those blowtorch to the belly questions and with no recourse, and you're still getting paid, and it has got no impact on your career whatsoever, whichever way those questions were answered. And now you're going to become a trainer and things of that nature. Were there any sort of fears on your part, or was there people that would have helped you go to the next level, or did you just keep asking yourself, shouldn't journalists just stay in journalism, don't meddle with the other side?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes to all three, really. I think whenever you're facing change in your personal life, it tends to be a bit nerve-wracking. And for me, I suppose the first transition I did was I became a lecturer in journalism. So I had lots of experience as a political correspondent and as a foreign correspondent in London and in Berlin and covering these revolutions. And so I was teaching the young up and coming generation how to ask questions, which they often didn't get training in that kind of thing at universities. So I was able to give real practical experience to them and real practical advice, both in writing stories and and particularly in conducting interviews. And I'm really so proud to say a lot of my students ended up winning awards. There were two ceremonies I went to where we didn't just win an award, we came third and second and first. And at one of them, it was a BBC competition for the best documentary. And the BBC said, look, we're doing this competition. We've done this competition to find the best documentary. And I was training M.E.A. students in how to make radio documentaries. And we're going to give prizes for the best documentaries. And they rang me up just before the prize giving ceremony in Manchester. And they said, listen, we can't tell you anything about the results, but you ought to bring all your students. Please bring your students. Come up to Manchester. It'll be worth your while. So all my students went up by train to Manchester, and that was really exciting. And they announced the third prize, and ta-da! My students had done their documentaries in pairs, most of them. So two of them got the third prize, and then two of them got the second prize. And the good thing was, I know there was one particular documentary which was, I have to say, better than all the other documentaries, which was a documentary with really tough questions from a mad religion called Scientology. And they'd done an expose on this religion. And I thought, we've won the third and the second. We've still got the best one, hasn't been announced yet. And sure enough, the one done by two of my journalists who are now doing very well in the real world. One is a Sky News presenter. The other one's done very well at the BBC. They got the first prize. So we got the lot. And that happened again at another competition. But with this one, it was special because they said, well, we've worked out that all these documentary makers have the same lecturer. So we're going to give a BBC award, a special award, to their lecturer. And they gave one to me, which was quite touching in a way. But it was great that they all did so well. And many drinks were had. In fact, they were sponsored by the head of the department, who said, spend what's necessary, keep the students happy, which we did, and a great time was had by all. So that was a kind of transition point to helping journalists and helping them ask tough questions, and then thinking, well, I was starting to get invitations to come into companies and help them deal with journalists. And I went to some sessions with journalistic colleagues who were recovering journalists, and so I ultimately became a recovering journalist and thought, this is a really positive thing. There's a great need for it. People are often terrified of journalists, and they don't have to be. They need to be thinking, how can I help the audience behind the journalist? And so I ended up being addicted to that, and I learnt the golden formulas for giving great answers, which are in the book, Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work. There's two golden formulas. Or I should say formulae for the Latin scholars who are watching this. And they are out there, and they both work, but you've got to be able to apply them to your situation. And a lot of my speeches and training sessions are aimed at helping people apply the formulas to give great answers, which often has a very positive philosophical effect on their life. Because when you're giving positive answers to negative questions, tough questions, blowtorch on the belly questions, you can have a much more positive outlook. And so that's kind of the pathway that I followed when I was on my own. And I did have great people who have been and are professional speakers who gave a lot of help on the way, because I didn't know there was such a thing as being a professional speaker, but there really is. There's even a professional speaking association in Australia, which I might be visiting next year, because they're hosting the Global Speakers Summit, Global Speakers Federation gathering in Cairns early in 2026. So I might go along to that. And yeah, it's a real profession, and I've learned a lot about it from people who've been professional speakers doing this profession that a lot of people don't know exists, but really does. And when you become an expert at what you do, then that option is open to you. You can write books, and you can become a professional talker on your topic, and it's a great way in this time where there's so much change going on, and there's so many people often get made redundant, not because they're incompetent, but they're often left and their immediate thought is, I've got nowhere to go. And becoming an author and a professional speaker in your area of expertise is something you can do. And I've had some great helpers along the way, and in the association that I'm in, which is the Professional Speaking Association of the United Kingdom and Ireland, there's a great ethos in the organisation to help other people to become better professional speakers, and to help your audiences, and to go beyond what the audience is asking, or you're told by the speaker booker what they need. Sometimes you can transcend that. And it basically is a very giving kind of profession. And it's a very nice one to be in, because people give to you their advice in terms of how to be a better speaker, but how to run a speaking business, and how to write books that actually appear on bookshelves and sell, which is useful skills. So just because you get a redundancy notice doesn't mean your life is over. Positive things can await you if you make them happen.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for taking us there. Now, obviously, with all the speaking that you're now doing, you've done it in so many different places, and you've come across so many different, would I say, cultures. And I think you have said you've spoken in 6 different continents, and obviously Antarctica eludes you. You know why,
Yeah.
Michael? Because you're not a penguin. But
yeah, I don't know why. Yeah, I've got to get on side with those penguins.
Absolutely. But which continent really challenged you the most, and what sort of communication lesson did you take away from that?
Well, I went to South America, which I'd always wanted to do. And I remember in Canberra, I applied to cover some trade talks that were going on in Uruguay. And my head of department said, oh, yeah, if you can get a cheap enough airfare, we might be able to fly you over there. But the ABC budget was beyond it, so it didn't happen. But so I did a couple of trips to South America, to Brazil. And yeah, a very vibrant culture, but it is different. Yeah, there are some things there. People get very excited about things in a very positive way quite often. Because I did get to see preparations for the great festival they have in Rio de Janeiro. Rio de Janeiro, I thought Sydney was a great city, but Rio de Janeiro is probably even more spectacular. And it was great to be there. And funnily enough, at the time when I was there, they had this new president, President Lula, and he's back as president now. He got put in jail at some stage, which I think was pretty unfair. They had a couple of much less impressive presidents than President Lula. But one of the great things about President Lula, apart from the fact that he's ultimately on the side of the poor, and also on the side of the environment, which in Brazil, where you've got these great rainforests, which a bad president called President Bolsonaro tried to burn down, or basically allowed people to burn them down. President Lula is very much on the side of ecology and the world future. And one of the things about President Lula is that the Brazilians think he looks a bit like me. Now, I'm not as clever as President Lula, but one of the things I did do, and one of the things I've learned, I used to do this with my students in helping them become better journalists, was I used to run mock press conferences where I would play a fictitious character, often one called Fred Nurk. Fred Nurk could be a politician, he could be a vicar, he had various guises, and occasionally, a couple of times, I had Fred Nurk's wife, who I had an actress in the class, and she played the role of the wife, and she'd be at the press conference too. That was a bit of fun. And so when I got to Rio de Janeiro, and I was training people to deal with journalists, so one of the steps to actually understand journalists is to try and do a bit of journalism yourself. Sometimes it's harder than people think. But I thought, I'll have one of these mock press conferences and I'll have a special guest and I will be him. And so I was President Lula for a 1 hour period where I had this press conference, and they asked me tough questions. And because they were Brazilian, they're mainly Brazilian, some were from other countries, but they were there to learning how to understand journalists and to deal with journalists. They asked me really tough questions, the kind of questions that Brazilian voters would put to someone like President Lula. And President Lula did okay. I think the real President Lula probably would have done much better. But having this mock press conference thing was something that I thought, this really works. So even when I go to a country where I don't look like the president, sometimes I come up with some kind of character in the news, maybe a bit like reality, and have a press conference in the training session where people will ask questions from their cultural perspective. And I have learned over time that, while journalism, even in various democracies, is a vibrant profession, journalists in particular countries often have a particular way of doing things. In Australia, they're really tough, hence the blowtorch on the belly question thing, which Neville Rand spotted. In other countries, they may be more sophisticated or they may be more cunning. And one of the jobs I had, which was going to a whole lot of different places around the world on behalf of the UK. So I was staying in British consulates and British embassies and training their people how to deal with the media. And one of the good things about that exercise was that we ended up in all kinds of places, in Osaka in Japan, in Tokyo. We ended up in Beijing. We ended up in Lisbon, in Portugal, loads of places, Singapore, lots of different countries. And each time they would actually have a small budget to bring in a local journalist, a real life journalist, who would give a little talk to the audience on how things were in their country from a journalist perspective. And so when we did St. Petersburg in Russia, we had a journalist he wasn't Russian, he was a New Zealander, but he was running a newspaper, and he said, well, things are different here. If you're giving a press release to a newspaper and you want them to publish it, they will expect you to have to pay for it, which is not kind of what happens in Australia, believe it or not, in my knowledge, unless things have changed since 1988. No, that's good to hear. And it doesn't tend to happen in Britain. But there's different cultures that you have to get used to. And so as part of this experience, I was able to sort of find out about the local cultures in different places from a journalist's perspective. And that was really interesting and really helpful, because I was there to sort of help people give great answers, but having a local journalist meant that they could have a sort of reality check where that journalist was coming in saying, well, this is how we do it in the Middle East, or this is how we do it in Prague or whatever. And that was really enlightening. So in terms of being a global speaker, I've been able to help get a kind of global outlook, so that I know that people who you're training who have to go before global audiences need to sort of get some planning, preparing, and practicing for individual journalists in different countries, which can be different. And so that if you can understand your audience, it's a great step on the way to giving great answers to that audience. And so when I'm helping people, training them or speaking to an audience in different countries, I can bring another dimension of sort of, I'm not so much Michael Dodd Australian, I'm Michael Dodd citizen of the world, who is able to help. And that's a nice place to be.
Absolutely. And thank you so much. Now, you bring something very fascinating there, Michael, where you're assuming another character and you're assuming, like you said, a pseudonym. And in this, in this context, you appeared as Fred Nick. Now, is that part of Fred Nurk? Sorry.
N-U-R-K. Yeah,
Nurk,
I've got a bit of Fred Nurk has got a bit of a cult following, so I need to make sure you spell his name right.
You need to make sure we attribute it. Yeah. So does it help? Let's say you are that CEO or person that you then assume a character, because I think even athletes or people that play sport, they become some sort of a warrior when they're in the game, and after that they revert back to who they are. Would that be something that you recommend?
Well, I do that. Like when I'm working with chief executives, sometimes their tough questions are not so me, although obviously I can handle that and help them with that. But often they have, a difficult person on their team, and I get them to describe that person, and then I kind of become that person and ask the kind of questions that person would ask. So that is that's it's kind of helpful for me in a way, but that's helpful for them. And so as you say, and I've trained a lot of sports people. I've trained a lot of people in Australia, as you know. Even though you're in Melbourne, I'm sure you've heard of a game called rugby league, because it's when I was in Sydney, they used to have the Sydney competition. Now they've got the national rugby league competition, including a Melbourne team and a couple of Queensland teams, and so rugby league came to Melbourne. Well, over here, which is where rugby league and rugby union were invented, in Britain, there's not a lot of rugby league down south. Rugby league, there is a London team in the Super League competition, but most rugby league in the UK is a Northern England game, and so I got a job to help rugby league players to give great interviews after the match. And you're right. They are warriors, some of them, and they have quite an aggressive attitude, which helps them when they're on the field. But they need to be a real person and the real selves after that. And so, whereas they might have an aggressive approach to tackling a player on the other team, which is perfectly legitimate in a game of rugby league, when they come off the field and they get a question from a journalist, you don't want them tackling the journalist. And so one of the things that I did to help them was, and this is part of the planning, preparation, and practice, was that the particular team that I was focused on, they would typically give interviews. The captain had to give interviews after their team had won or lost. And they would often do it just straight off when they came off the pitch. And that's quite a tough thing to do. And what I used to say was, take a 10-minute break before you face the media when you come off, because obviously it's a very different press conference or individual interview if you've won the game or if you've lost the game. And if you've lost the game, you still want to be pointing out the positives. I'll give you an example of that, because they were doing it very badly when I came. And I got them to take this break before they would do the interview so that they could actually have 10 minutes thinking time, perhaps talking to the coach or the manager before they appeared in front of the media, so that if they had lost, they could identify positives within the game. So it wasn't just like, oh, we lost, life's terrible. I might resign from the team and never play rugby league again. That's not a great answer. Not exactly inspiring. So I'll give you the example that was one that stuck in my mind because the captain used it on a big media hookup after a game, and it went down really well. This team was very good at attack. I won't identify the team, but they actually had some Australian players who were particularly good. They'd come over because Australia plays rugby league at a very high standard, and people in Britain realised that. And so buying Australian players is something that happens. And they had some very good Australians and some homegrown British players who were very good at attack. But as a team, they weren't so good at defence. And I worked with the officials and the managers and the players, and they all decided, yeah, look, we're great at attack, but we're lousy at defence. And they came up with a plan to improve their defence. They had particular kind of training where they were improving their tackling. They had tackling machines brought in that they could practice their tackling on. And so they actually had a positive story on their defence. So even when they lost a game and their defence wasn't very good, which it often wasn't, they had a positive message, which was, yes, we lost. We scored some great tries, but unfortunately we let too many tries through. But we are working on our defence, and we are taking our defence to a higher level, and that's what we're going to work on so that we can do better in future. And so they had a positive message, and sure enough, they actually improved their performance. They ended up coming runners up to a really important competition. They've got several rugby league competitions that run simultaneously here, and they ultimately did win this cup, and not in the year I was with them, but sometime after. But they had a kind of a positive mindset in their great answers to journalists after they'd taken a 10-minute break after the game, and that had a positive effect on the team. And yeah, having a positive mindset is really important. And if you actually learn to give positive answers, it can actually go beyond your great answers to tough questions. It can go to your life and can help you have a more positive outlook. Because when I'm training people to, typically it's like, think of the positive message you want to get across, even if you lost the game. Even if you could have played better and your defence wasn't as good as it should be, what's the positive message? We are working to improve our defence. And if you go into life like that, something bad happens, but you have a positive message in your brain, I'm doing this to overcome it, I will improve this, I will get better at this, then it can transform the way people come across and the way they interact, not just on the sporting field, but beyond. So sport is a good example to talk about where you can give great positive answers to journalist questions after the game, whether you've lost or won, but it can have a transformational effect on team performance as well, which in the sporting world is really important.
Absolutely, yeah, because the sportsman is still breaking a sweat, and then they're still huffing and puffing, and the mic is right in their face. So, what do you think of the game? And the guy's like, "We're not done yet."
I mean, sometimes you do get a great answer from a captain coming off the field, but other times they're too close to it. Yeah. I've noticed in cricket over here, there's a guy who is the captain of the England team, a guy called Ben Stokes. You'll probably see him in Australia in an Ashes series coming soon. He's injured at the moment, but I've seen him give really bad answers where he's come off and he gets quite emotional for a tough guy. And sometimes when he's given the answers just too close to the end of the game, he's still sweating from coming out from the middle or whatever. and he's very good at scoring sixes, and he's very good at bowling unplayable balls. He's very good at bowling them. He's a good all rounder. He's a brilliant fieldsman as well. But like when he's coming out from the middle, and if he stops and gives an interview there on the way back to the stand, he is huffing and puffing a bit, and he's probably got a few injuries or whatever, and he's so much better when he goes away and obviously has a shower and probably a chat to the team support, which with the England cricket team, warning to Australia, their managers and players have been remarkably good in recent years. So he has a chat to them, and then he gives the interview, and he gives much better answers. And I think that applies same to CEOs. If they just come out of a tough board meeting and they've got an interview planned, it's better to give themselves a little bit of a break to come down after the boardroom battles before they do it, and gives them time to think about the positive messages, so that when they're there with the journalists, they can be far more impressive than they can be as soon as they walk out of the boardroom thing there, where they probably want to kick the cat. I don't believe in kicking cats, but that's probably their mentality. Sometimes that translates into metaphorically kicking the journalist. I think I mentioned some kind of leader in the United States who likes to attack the media. He talks about fake news or whatever, and he gets into a really aggressive thing. Now, you might think he's brilliant, or you might think he's not. I've got a view on that, but certainly in media performance, he's not. If you attack the media rather than try to understand where the media questions are coming from and deal with them honestly, if you just attack the media, then that's really bad. It's not great for your image. Whether you're Donald Trump or Donald Duck, it's not great for your image. And I train people to, even if they're getting tough questions from journalists, even if it's that question they really don't want, they can actually give a positive answer to it that is one that that didn't just pop into their brain, but they thought about earlier. And they can get across a positive message and give a colourful, positive example, and come out of the media, even off the back of something bad that's happened, they can still come out well, as these rugby league players did occasionally when they lost a match.
Absolutely. And as we sort of conclude the episode, I've been looking at your book, right? And you are talking in there about a win-win-win mindset, which I don't think a lot of people have, because some people would say, as long as you've heard my piece, then, I think we've communicated. Now, can you maybe explain that mindset in simple terms, especially when it comes to journalism? Because sometimes some journalists are coming with a gotcha sort of feel, and it feels like an attack, whereas you're saying you should actually go for a win-win-win solution. How does this change conversation?
Yeah, so the win-win-win, why is three of them, is really important. So typically, if you're coming out, you want to have a win on your side, but if you can give something helpful to the journalist, basically it doesn't have to be giving the answer that the journalist wants, but basically you're helping the journalist to be able to do their job professionally by giving them something which is of interest to their audience and useful to their audience, right? So you want to be thinking win-win-win means a positive for you as the interviewee. It means a positive for the interviewer, the journalist, and the journalist's audience, right? Whether they're a newspaper and they've got readers, or they're a radio station and they've got listeners, or they're a TV journalist and they've got viewers, you want to be thinking beyond just this journalist in front of me who, and as you know from earlier in the conversation, we're trained in the ABC and other places to ask really tough questions, blowtorch on the belly questions, yeah? And the trick is for the answerer, don't take that personally. Can you deal with that and give an honest answer to that blowtorch on the belly question, but do so in a way where you're moving on to a positive message that you can get across, right? And ideally, give an example, paint a picture in the minds of the audience that they can actually see the situation you're talking about because you've described it so well. And if you do that well, then it's a win for you, a win for the journalist, and a win for the journalist's audience. And that's the kind of thing you want to be thinking about. It's not, how can I insult this journalist in a way that's going to destroy him or her? It's how can I provide them something useful for them and something useful for their audience, and that way I will come out as a winner too. So if you think win-win-win, it's achievable if you do your planning, preparation, and practice beforehand. It can be done.
Absolutely. And as we sort of conclude this episode here, where can people get either the book or get to learn a little bit more about what it is that you do, Michael?
So Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work is available in three forms. It's a paperback book, which you can get on Amazon. It's a Kindle. There's a Kindle version of it. And amazingly enough, there's an audio book, a talking book. And this is important in terms of our conversation about role play, Prosper. I had to audition with Amazon because I thought, as a broadcaster, who should read the Michael Dodd book for the audience? Michael Dodd. And so I had to go to Amazon in London and audition, and it wasn't a automatic thing. I had to read a chapter and get critiqued on it, and I had to read it. But the audio book is available on Audible, and you can just sit back in your headphones and have the book read to you in a ever so slight but highly sophisticated Australian accent, which I'm sure your viewers and listeners are used to tuning into, and they can probably pick a highly sophisticated Australian stroke Zimbabwean accent, but they can probably even pick a pure sophisticated Australian accent, slightly augmented from living in the civilized world of Europe. But yeah, it's available on audio. So the book is very available. And just in general, Michael Dodd Communications is an entity. There's a Michael Dodd Communications website, www.michaeldoddcommunications.com. So you can find out all the ways that I can help people there. And so there's also an email address if you're keen to get in touch with me. Not www. It's the email address is Michael, Michael, often misspelt, Michael at michaeldoddcommunications.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and Facebook. If you want to send me a LinkedIn invitation, say you heard me on Prosper's program and you'd like to connect, I pretty much always say yes to LinkedIn invitations if it comes with a message. I don't accept the automated ones because I think, well, who the hell could this be? But if it's a nice little message there saying, I listened to Prosper's program and I heard you and it would be great to be connected, if that works for you, then please get in touch. And if you want to get the Michael Dodd e-zine, which comes out free every few weeks, where I write about a current communications issue, can be in Britain, it can be in America, it can be in Australia sometimes. And sometimes I feature people who do interview answers really badly, and sometimes I feature people who do interview answers really well. If you want to get that, you can send me an email to the aforesaid email address and just say email please, and put your email address, and I'll get the tech guy, whose name is Guy, to put you on the list so that you get it in future.
Absolutely. I'll make sure that all those links are in the show notes, and definitely.
Hey, that's really helpful. That's a great answer, Prosper. There wasn't even a question, but it's still a great answer.
Absolutely. Now,
I can spot them.
Speaking of questions and things of that nature, just to wind up, what we've been talking about, what's the most surprising question somebody has ever asked you, Michael? And how did your golden formula response actually save the day?
Well, I'll give you an example which went from those "don't ask me that" questions to me to being one that I quite welcome now. And the question was, having come over here from sunny Australia. I know the sun sometimes shines in Melbourne. I've been there on good days and not so good days. And even in Sydney, where I was born, the sun doesn't always shine. I must say, every time I go to Perth, the sun always shines in Perth. But the thing is that people in Britain are aware that Australia's got a more conducive climate than London and Manchester and Glasgow. And so they often say, why? Why, Michael Dodd, if you've had the sort of golden ticket in life to be born in Australia, why would you want to come over and live here? Because of the weather. And so I did used to sort of think, my goodness, what the hell am I going to say to that? But the answer, which I think is closer to a great answer now, is that, well, I had a great time in Australia. Australia's a wonderful country. I do go back there sometimes. I might be going back there next year. And it's got a lot of positive things. But I was a political reporter, and working in Canberra, it kind of is a very limited world in some ways. Probably less limited now than it was when I was working there in the 1980s because of global communications eruption since then. But Canberra was kind of very sort of small and constrained in a way, even though we had the Prime Minister and the opposition leader and all the party leaders there. And that's why I came over here to find out about what politics is like and what life is like working and living in, I see it in Europe. I live in the UK at the moment, but I have lived in Berlin, which is a great experience. So living in Europe, I say more happens in the Northern Hemisphere. So from a journalistic point of view, there's a lot more balls in the air at any particular time. You're meeting lots more people. I mean, there are fascinating people in Australia, but you meet a lot more people over here. And so that's why I'm here. And as a base, London is great for an international speaker because transport connections are fantastic to so many places. And I get opportunities to speak to audiences that I get from London that I probably wouldn't be getting in Sydney or Canberra. So you can be an international speaker based in Sydney and Canberra, and some people are. But I find being based in London as a sort of world city is a great place as a launch pad. And so this is a great place to be, knowing that Australia is still there and I can go back to it when necessary.
Absolutely. And wow, what a journey, man. What a journey, Michael Dodd. I mean, for those that have been tuned in with us, thank you so much for choosing the Online Prosperity Show to get insights like this. I mean, we just spoke to Michael Dodd, the journalist, speaker, mentor, someone with the guts to turn any frazzled response into an opportunity for connection. And I've learned quite a lot, Michael, today, just hearing you speak. And thank you so much for spending the time with me today on the call.
Well, it has been a pleasure, and hopefully some of my answers at least have provided win-win-wins to me, to you, and most importantly, as a podcaster, to your magnificent audience out there viewing or watching or listening. So hopefully there's been some win-win-wins all around, and great to hear from any of your audience members who do want to email or contact me on LinkedIn. It's always great to really engage with a real audience. And if you want to ask me a tough question out there, you're very welcome, and I'll try and give you a great answer.
Fantastic. Definitely. If you're hungry to communicate better or handle tough questions with grace or just shine under pressure, I will put all those links in the show notes below. And be sure to grab his book, Great Answers to Tough Questions at Work. I'll definitely be grabbing a copy myself there. Now, if this episode really stirred something in you, I want you to type in the comments, I've been there. You know, maybe you had to answer really hard questions and you didn't know how to get by those. Just type, I've been there in the comments there, because I really want to create a community that turns pressure into possibility. And don't forget to obviously tune in next time. I've just got word that the next episode, we are going to be talking about how to bring all of this into your life so you can have a happier existence. And if you are maybe getting started on your way being a coach or consultant, or you are part of a group, please share this podcast with someone that you know that could benefit from becoming a stronger communicator. And obviously, if somebody has shared this with you, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss on what's coming up next. Until next time, keep growing, keep shining, and let every tough question be your moment to answer with grace. And I know, Michael, you've got one last thing you wanted to say, sir.
It's just inspired by you there, Prosper. It was something you said about pressure, and if you turn pressure into possibility. Yeah. I was going to say this could be a slogan for you, but you don't have to have it. If you turn pressure into prosperity, you will prosper.
I like that. Thank you so much.